lighting the fuse for freedom. TNT Radio.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the program. That was a quick intro. Caught me by surprise. I want to welcome onto the stage for this segment international human rights lawyer and author Arnaud Develay is joining us on the live link right now to help us make sense of what's happened over the weekend. Arnaud, and I know you released a statement on this on your Telegram channel, which we've also published at 21stcenturywire.com. And the headline here on your statement is United States attack on civilians. How will Moscow react? Well, Arnaud, you're saying United States attack on civilians. That's not what the Western mainstream media is saying. The Western mainstream media is saying Russia claims that Ukraine dropped ATACMS missiles or cluster munitions on the beach, according to the Kremlin, quote unquote. I'm paraphrasing a lot of the Western media. They can't come out and make a definitive headline about what happened. Obviously, that is the diametric opposite of what you're saying. You're saying, yes, this is U.S. involvement. Explain why.
Well, obviously, as it's been related for weeks now, as far as the ATACMS systems are concerned. Those very sophisticated systems require global reconnaissance flight and databases to be essentially communicated to the personnel on the ground for calibrating purposes. So there's no way the current quote-unquote Ukrainian army could on its own manage such system with such accuracy. So obviously, we've heard about those drones patrolling the Black Sea area near the Crimea, the last few days. There was another one on the day of the attacks, but basically they are constantly patrolling. They've been doing the same thing also off the coast of Syria for years. So it's the same pattern essentially, and it requires reconnaissance flight and transmission of data essentially. So obviously the US at the highest level, including the White House spokesperson and the Pentagon spokesperson, and I seem to recall the European Union Foreign Office, so to speak, a spokesperson, Mr. Steno, somehow evade the question and somehow, insinuate that Moscow is somewhat, drawing on conclusions that, that they're sorry about civilian losses, that it's always regrettable, in cases of conflict. But they quickly somehow invalidate this by saying that, well, all they have to do, i.e. the Russians, is to basically pull out of Ukrainian territories, and that until that happens, Ukraine somehow is justified in doing whatever it takes to reclaim those territories, even if, unfortunately, again, this leads to civilian losses. So if you read between the lines, obviously, it's all basically an half-baked statement, which, gives them enough wriggling room to somewhat, on the face of it, deny that they've participated in any way, shape, or form. But again, I mean, the facts are stubborn. Those weapon systems require sophisticated expertise, and only the U.S. and its allies are in a position to provide it.
Okay, so this right now we're looking at the situation whereby we have reports of numerous civilian deaths and injuries as well. We have some video of that Crimea attack, actually, but when we have that ready, we'll play that. But basically, cluster munitions were dispersed. So you have people, sunbathing on the beach in Sevastopol, and you have these ATACMS coming in. We do have reports of a U.S. Global Hawk drone, the very type that are required to provide and assist in guidance and targeting information for these very systems. But yet we have these wide denials that there's no evidence of U.S. involvement. Arnaud, how long can they keep this charade going? Because if the shoe is on the other foot, certainly there'd be just righteous indignation all day long, 24/7. I mean, just imagine if any European country or anybody or, Israeli beachgoers had been subject to anything similar to this. We wouldn't hear the end of it. There'd be calls for, nuclear annihilation of the perpetrators. I'm not exaggerating. This is what would happen. They'd be going crazy. So right now they're just denying that it happened right across the Western media on this. So, I mean, it's pretty incredible state of affairs, Arnaud. That's where we're standing right now. Now, I want to talk to you about the political calculus on this. And of course, you've written about this in your statement on Telegram. But it seems that the timing of this, Arnaud, is extremely suspect in terms. It's coming right at a time when you're starting to hear the noises about, we need to look at a negotiated settlement in Kiev. We got statements from even Kuleba, foreign minister in Kiev, even him, the hawk of hawks, the man, the Ukrainian nationalist extraordinaire. He's saying, "Wow, this peace process in Switzerland isn't really going to work unless we have Russia at the table." We've also got Yermak, chief of staff of Zelensky. He's saying we're open to talking to Russia now. Then we have Mark Milley, joint chiefs of staff, former, retired, saying on a panel just 2 days ago that there's no military solution for this conflict. We need a negotiated settlement, and that's going to have Russia involved in it. So a U-turn from him. And there's a leak, Arnaud, that the United States have been in secret talks with Moscow over preparing for a negotiated settlement. So while all those things happen this week, then this happens. How do you explain that?
Well, obviously, this shows that there's no one minding the ship in the U.S. In as far as the commander-in-chief is concerned, the guy is completely, absent. And so we have factions essentially vying for control of the strategic agenda. And you also forgot to mention Arestovich. Not that he is relevant anymore, but Arestovich has been somewhat of a measured voice, since he's falling from grace in Kiev. And, yes, everybody is coming, and the reasonable people in the room seem to be coming to the conclusion that only negotiation can resolve this protracted situation. And Moscow, within hours after the events, actually maintained their open stance on having negotiation take place. So, everybody seems to be somewhat coming to the same conclusion. There's a consensus, obviously, but then we have those hardliners, those war hawks who've bet so much on this Ukraine project, who are hell-bent on pursuing some nefarious agenda, which were echoed again recently by the Polish foreign minister, who blabbered on about breaking Russia down into 200 parts. So we still have those kind of holdouts, and they're somewhat easily recognizable. Those are the hardcore neocons and their acolytes. Whether it's this Sikorsky guy or a few of them in Europe. We also have statements emanating from European nations such as Hungary and Serbia, and Borrell coming out and saying, Serbia, if you're going to somewhat attempt to engage with Russia, this is not going to help your bid to join the EU. So, this is a kind of a pantomime, and don't forget we have this debate coming up on Thursday. And this is also a way to somehow shift the focus on foreign development, as this debate of all the debate of all danger. That's what I call it. I mean, for the Democrats, we can only expect that they're going to pull every stop to somehow manage to present a manageable version or portrayal of their candidate, or what's left of it. So all those factors, I guess, are to be taken into account. But again, there are definitely a faction, the same, the usual suspects, because Noonan, despite all claim to the contrary, is still there. She's still pulling the strings. She's the go-to lady. There's a bunch of liberal interventionists, also, fellow travelers who are still there. And those people know that time is ticking. So they're trying to bait, essentially, the Russians into reacting in some kind of, disproportionate manner, and somehow hope that whatever reaction can be obtained will be the casus belli to somewhat flip the coin on, for all I know, all the remaining schedule bearing on the election itself. Even if we could
so the strategy is poke Russia, and get Russia to react, and then when Russia reacts, saying, look at Russia, look what they've done. This is what we warned you about. So they absolutely want to get that result out of this, and that's what I see here. We've got the footage here. We're going to play this. We'll talk about this on the other side, but let's go ahead and roll. This is actual footage from the beach over the weekend in Sevastopol. Take a look at this. So Arnaud, that pop, that's cluster munitions coming from the attack. Arnaud, under international law, you're an international human rights lawyer as well as an author and a journalist, but under international law, is this a war crime? And if so, who's culpable?
Well, it is a war crime because obviously there are no military value to those targets, and so it's really state terrorism. And to the extent Kiev is the nominal culprit, if we apply the but-for analysis, none of this would have been possible without the global orcs providing the data. So, you follow the chain of command in a way, and the causality, and you find yourself in Washington, D.C. So it is a war crime by all accounts, and there's nothing more heinous than, going after basically beachgoers, people who are completely unsuspecting of what from 1 second to the next might befall them. And that's but again, this is what state terrorism is about. It's to try to inflame public opinion and try to create an outcry within Russian public opinion, which would then prompt the authorities here to do something, anything but do something. And this is where we have to be cautious, obviously, because that's the exact calculus that those hardcore all over in Washington are trying to elicit.
And we got a news article here. Let's bring a Crimean news article on the Crimean story. Bring this up on screen here, Arnaud. And it's interesting. You've got the headline, and then you've got the subheader as well. And it says, the headline says, Ukraine-Russia war latest. Moscow vows to retaliate against U.S. after missile attack on Crimea. And the subheadline is the important thing to pay attention to. The Russian Defense Ministry has claimed Ukraine used U.S. provided weapons in a strike on Crimea yesterday that killed at least 4 people and injured 151 more. Meanwhile, EU accession talks with Ukraine are approaching in a political blow to Putin. Arnaud, this is just pure propaganda. This is what's going out on the news wires, Reuters, AP, AFP, all the main wires. This is the sort of language that's going out. I had a big rant about this in my opening monologue, but they can't even attribute any responsibility. But yet this is the same mainstream media establishment that will immediately attribute blame to, let's say, Syria anytime there's an accusation of a chemical weapons attack over 10 years. I mean, this is just you can see the total control by the Western powers over the mainstream media and how they frame all of these stories. Your thoughts?
Yes, you're right. We've seen this in Syria. We've seen this also in the current situation in Gaza. I mean, I read a headline a couple of days ago that says the war claimed children's lives. The war. So we're not trying to identify anybody specifically. But we see the same thing also in the IAEA reports, when it comes to the shelling in Zaporozhye. There's some kind of spontaneous out of the blue shelling of the nuclear plant, but we never get to find out who is doing the shelling. And so it's a way to massage the perception of what's going on, to somehow, claim that obviously, people are seeing the civilian death toll, but somehow completely exonerate, Washington is trying to exonerate its allies or its own personnel from having any kind of responsibility in this. So it's a what I call this kind of bland talk, and everything very circumspect and circumstantial. Things happen, take one for the team, or it's almost like a natural phenomenon, but it's not. And so, this is how the media basically has been playing it for decades. I mean, they haven't really changed their playbook on that. They always go about it the same way. They take, into account casualties among civilians, among children. They highlight, a state of affair, but they never go further into the analysis as to explaining who is responsible, what's the causality, and how did the situation get to come about in the first place.
Oh, well, don't talk about any of that, Arnaud. You'll destroy the narrative management there. You're talking about context, cause and effect, how we got to a point in history. I mean, this is off limits. You're literally not allowed to discuss any of that. We will tell you, or as they say, we will tell you how to frame the story. And history begins when we say it begins, at what point. So this is important. This is what we try to do on this show. I know this is an important part of your work as well. Arnaud's book as well, I'm just going to give a little shout out here, Foreign Entanglements. We'll get that image up on screen. This is an excellent book. This just came out in the most recent weeks and so forth. Arnaud Develay, Foreign Entanglements, Ukraine, Biden, the Fractured American Political Consensus. In this book are all the receipts of Biden corruption in Ukraine, but not just that, just the systematic, total micromanagement by the United States of every aspect of Ukrainian state agencies, governing, economics, everything, Arnaud. So to say that the United States is not involved in the decision-making of the military and intelligence decisions being made is on its face ridiculous, just on the basis of how much aid they get. But as you detail in your book, Arnaud, the external management, as you call it, is completely widespread across pretty much all major functions of the state. Is that an exaggeration?
No, it's not. And actually, the expression was coined by André Derkach, who was on the inside for many, many years, who keeps getting live information as to what's going on, and it can explain in very detailed fashion. And this is what the book chronicles: how, as you said, the U.S. has completely phagocyted the Ukrainian state apparatus. They set the agenda in terms of draft bills. They decide who's going to be carrying out the bill on the floor. They rearrange the coalition when, for the time being, it looks as if, a change might be in order. They pick the candidate. They pick who's going to be handling the foreign aid. And whenever somebody appears to deviate from any kind of agreed upon narrative, the U.S. Embassy in Kiev, through the NABU apparatus, the National Anti-Corruption Bureau, basically goes after them and remove them before they somehow create damages to the narrative. So it's basically a takeover, complete cannibalizing of the Ukrainian state, or what's left of it, and all we're left with is essentially a bunch of people planted there by Washington who, unbeknownst to a lot of people in terms of perception, have managed to get some information put aside as an insurance policy. And in some respect, one might wonder if Washington did not bargain too much, or got much more than they bargained for. because obviously Zelensky himself knows that his time is counting. And one would be a complete fool not to understand that at some point he may likely be, disposed of. Despite, people believing that he has a few villas, and casinos and what have you, left, right, and center. This guy knows too much. And I always say, Zelensky is Saddam Hussein's version of the 21st century. Saddam, was executed over an obscure case that was quickly assembled against him, bearing on not a crackdown, but basically he's executing of his presidential powers at the time, in a time of war. And this is the case they used to basically promptly try him, convict him, and execute him before any other cases was opened into, including the Anfal campaign against the Kurds and the massacre of the Shia in the south at the close of the first Gulf War. And so, we don't want people like this to start, spreading the beans and explaining how they got, everything they needed, including nerve gas and VX gas that, was used, during their, trying to contain Iran at the time. So it's par for the course. And Zelensky should definitely study history. And I'm sure he has. And to the extent he has done his homework, he has a lot of goods on this external management scheme. So it might be actually worth, watching what's going to happen, because he may have, the dead man switch scenario set up just in case something happens to him.
Yeah, without a doubt, Zelensky's days are numbered. We're all waiting for the dramatic season finale of Servant of the People, the reality show, as a sequel to the TV sitcom drama in Ukraine. That was the name of the program, in fact, where he starred as the sort of hapless, incidental president of Ukraine. That's how they conditioned the public to get used to him as the president. This was back in 2015, 16, 17. And then he actually ran for president under Servant of the People, the same name as the TV program. And lo and behold, he wins and becomes president. How come he won? How did he win? He said, we are going to have peace with the East, peace with Russia. That's what he ran on. And of course, elected with an overwhelming majority, and he got into power and proceeded to do the opposite. So no surprise there. That's what politicians tend to do. But in this case, it had absolutely egregious results for the country of Ukraine. It may never recover. Certainly will never be what it was before. And the longer this conflict goes on, driven by NATO, driven by the external management, as you call it, and others, Arnaud, the worse it's going to get for Ukraine. The less of the country they're going to be able to retain, the more damage done, and the greater loss of life. And that's the real tragedy, is the amount of Ukrainian men that have died in what can only be described as NATO's vanity project. This war, this proxy war, is really a vanity project for the West and for NATO, with huge consequences for the country of Ukraine. A real tragedy historically here. Didn't need to happen, Arnaud. There are plenty of solutions on the table before February 2022. Russia certainly did its best to give offers to come to some kind of treaty arrangement. And then you had the Minsk Accords, which was ratified at the UN Security Council level by unanimous vote, I might add. But they slow walked that. They sabotaged that. Anything to prevent peace, because it seemed, Arnaud, there are a lot of people in the West that wanted this war to happen. They did everything possible to push things into position to actually make it happen. And in the end, it did. And I think now the problem we're witnessing over the weekend, there are people in the West that want to escalate. They want to escalate. And I think there's a split, Arnaud. We saw these statements by Trump and Farage, Nigel Farage from the UK, Trump in the US, both saying that the problem with this conflict is created by NATO enlargement. Now, that's not a coincidence. I want to talk to you about what your opinion is about those talking points from those two individuals. And then this happens on the weekend. I don't think this series of events is a coincidence. We'll break some of this down with our guest here in the first hour, Arnaud Develay. He's an author of a book called Foreign Entanglements. We'll bring that on screen again. Foreign Entanglements, which really opens the whole lid on all of the scandals regarding Biden corruption, but also how they created the Russiagate hoax to begin with, and how that really started in Ukraine with the Democratic Party operatives framing Paul Manafort. All the receipts are in this book, folks. So go to Amazon, put this in the search, buy this book. It's excellent. It is a golden resource and a piece of historical documentation. So nobody can tell you it didn't happen. All the receipts, all the details are in this book by Arnaud Develay. Now, Arnaud, before the break, we were talking about the political dimension of this. I was surprised. I'm going to be honest with you, Arnaud. I was surprised Donald Trump had some really something intelligent to say about Ukraine. Sometimes his commentary, let's just say, is lacking in nuance and detail. But he said something that I was very happy that he said this past couple of days. He said that the problem in Ukraine, this whole conflict, was driven by NATO enlargement. NATO pressuring Russia. This is what triggered the hostilities. Now, that's not 100% all of the story, but it's a big, big component of it. And Nigel Farage in the UK, Reform Party leader, he's doing very well in the polls in the snap general election. He said exactly the same thing. Now, Arnaud, that can't be a coincidence. And at the same time, we see talk that we need to start talking to Russia about winding this disaster down. Do we see a split here, Arnaud, in the populist wing of politics, and then you have the intelligence services working with the deep state actors, working with, in Britain and the U.S., working with Ukraine, who keep provoking Russia? Now, that global hawk, that had to be off the books if that's providing targeting information. That's CIA territory. That's JSOC territory. It's not front of house work here. Or do we have a behind the scenes split going on about whether to keep this war going or ramp it up? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think you're right. We have a dichotomy. We have a factional infighting, whether it's in the US or in the UK. And it's somehow it delves into the upcoming elections in both those countries. And obviously, a lot is at stake, because those who were still, promoting escalation at some point know very well that if the other faction gets in, there's going to be an accounting or reckoning for what policy decisions were made. And so this is also a factor to take into account. It's not just a philosophical difference here. It's people literally fighting for their political life, their professional life, if not their own life, period. I mean, some of them might be, brought to face some charges, of endangering national security. I mean, national security is such an elastic concept that you can, to the extent you get control over the institutional levers, you can turn it around and, put some eggs on the face of your tormentors, your erstwhile tormentors. So, and nobody's going to really shed a tear on you, being on the receiving end this time around, because I guess the common sense in the West, whether it's the US or Europe, is that this thing has lasted long enough. Everybody's getting poorer by the day, and societies are being polarized. The establishment parties are completely discredited. And more and more, we are finding out corruption at in unprecedented scale. So it's kind of like a perfect storm of we hope at least a major cleanup, a spring cleanup, a Western spring. This is what we need to see. Coming back to Trump, to be sure, NATO has always been in his crosshair. Trump is. No matter how you look at the guy, he's a no-nonsense type of guy in terms of approaching business, and he considers NATO has outlived its usefulness. That there's no reason why the U.S. should, carry out most of the financing of the institution. He probably hates all those kind of bloated institutions in the first place, whether it's NATO or anything else on the international level. And he just wants to make sure there's a country left to be administered. He wants to save the country. And when we see, the damages inflicted on the territorial integrity of the U.S. in the last 4 years, it's unbelievable. I mean, the country is being disfigured as we speak. We might never recognize it again. And so, Trump might be wondering if he will even have enough time to repair all the damages that was done. So, of course, NATO becomes almost like, an obvious targeting point for him. It has, something. This whole operation should have been wrapped up in 1990, 1991, and it's some kind of an anachronism that this situation remains. As for Farage, well, I mean, Farage is also a no-nonsense type of guy. He's made his fortune in the financing business, and he spares no punches when it comes down to identifying the problem and giving it an appellation. He calls it as it is, as he sees it. And a lot of people are receptive to this kind of talk. A lot of people on the other side of the aisle, the proverbial aisle, would say that it's kind of demagogic talk, populist talk. But at the end of the day, you got to call things as you see it. And the problem we've had in the West the last 15 years, 15, 20 years, it's been kind of incrementally getting worse. But now we've reached a point where reality itself is subject to interpretation, diverse interpretation. We have a problem here.
Yeah,
we have to come back to empirical approach to problems and call things for what they are. If we don't agree on the description, the very description of the problems that we're facing, how can we begin to devise solutions? And that's really what's going on right now.
Yeah, we need to get to first principles. I mean, even BBC veteran John Simpson, veteran reporter, award-winning journalist, etc., war reporter, he tweets out a couple of days ago, this was Putin's war of choice, Putin's unprovoked war. This war was unprovoked. Why do they feel the need to keep repeating that talking point? Clearly, there's a memo that's gone around to pretty much all the high-profile influencers in politics and media in the UK, in leading NATO countries and also in the US, they all repeat that. If you need to keep repeating that talking point, it means that it's not true. That's my initial reaction instinctively to that. But you can see they're really trying hard to warp and contort reality, because at the end of the day, there were many things that preceded February 25th, 2022, which caused this conflict to ramp up and happen. And everybody knows that, who's honest, who's studied it and covered the Maidan coup, even going back further to the Orange Revolution. We can go even further than that if we want to. But you're right, we do have a problem with reality. There's dishonest people in media, in politics, and they're really part of the problem, because without them, none of this would be possible, unfortunately. Now, Arnaud, I want to get your take. We've got a couple minutes left. This terror attack, another terror attack within the Russian Federation. We'll bring this BBC report up on screen. 20 dead in attacks on churches and a synagogue in southern Russia. We're talking about the Caucasus regions here in Dagestan, previously, famed as a sort of, Al-Qaeda, ISIS recruitment hotbed. Of course, things are much deeper than that. You intimate this, of course, as your statement that we published on Telegram at 21st Century Wire. First of all, your reactions to this. And of course, I look at this in the same frame as the Crocus City Hall, Moscow terror attacks, which we saw in March. But what are your thoughts on what's going on? What's actually going on here?
Well, as you say, it's a continuation of the strategy pursued in the wake of the Crocus City Hall. But I would even go as far back as what happened in France in the year 2016 alone, when we had those kind of disconvoluted individuals completely out of context, somehow suffering from mental impairment, easy to manipulate, going into churches and slicing the throat of a priest in front of the parishioners in Saint-Étienne-du-Vouvray. Or this crazy truck getting on the Promenade des Anglais in Nice and mowing down over 80 people. So sheer nihilism, When we do catch the guy alive, none of his whole story makes sense. I mean, the guy sounds like somehow a sociopath completely. He has no social life. He understands nothing about Islam. Everything is confused in his mind. But somehow, he gets access to logistics, equipment, and everything seems to be arranged for him and or them so that a maximum casualty rate is accomplished. And obviously, this is part of the same strategy. There's no doubt in my mind that the same kind of forces are behind the recruitment of somehow lost youth, in Lunel or in Butte-Chaumont in Paris, to send them via Turkey into Syria. It's the same thing. I mean, they may benefit from foreign security services assistance at some point, but this is really like a coordinated policy, by the deep state of all the countries involved in trying to destabilize a certain area of the world. And as you mentioned, Dagestan has always been, this kind of soft belly of the Russian Federation, through which, a lot of Western services are attempting to create chaos and destabilize the region. And again, with this component where, we try to basically frame Islam, because we have an Orthodox church, the priest, again, his throat is slit. We have a maximum carnage against law enforcement personnel, and the synagogue, of course. So, we have this Al Akbar statement at some point that somehow resurfaces. And so there you go. It kind of, wraps up, nutshell of what, they keep doing over and over. Give a bad name to Islam, try to get a part of the public opinion within Russia to point out, to some people within the Federation that should be handled a certain way. But it's really, what it's all about.
No, it's clear. It's clearly, in my opinion. Yeah, it's designed to inflame ethnic tensions within the Russian Federation. Obviously, there's economic problems all over the world. Certainly, Russia's no exception with sanctions and everything. So you have migrant labor coming from other parts of Central Asia to Moscow for work. This is creating ethnic tension. The West know this. So attacks like this is playing on that talking point. Let's bring up this article here from the Moscow terror attacks. We'll bring this up on screen. And what they introduced was interesting in March was this talking point about ISIS-K in the West. And they can't stop repeating this, ISIS-K, ISIS-K. Now they've attached so-called ISIS-K or ISIS Khorasan. They've attached this to the Dagestan attacks over the weekend. And if anybody really thinks, ISIS-K was deployed in Afghanistan and they're fighting the Taliban. So, it looks like a total Western intelligence construct, in my opinion, because I've been studying this right back to the Mujahideen in Afghanistan. In fact, you can track the Mujahideen in Afghanistan over to Bosnia, and then to Syria, and then through Turkey, and then redeployed in Iraq with ISIS, and then back to Syria again, and now to the Caucasus. Arnaud, you can actually trace the genealogy of these extremists and these so-called terrorist groups, which have clearly have the fingerprints of a lot of Western countries, including Israel, by the way, all over them. So paid for, directed, recruited, handled. Why? A strategy of tension. This is Operation Gladio all over again. This is what happened in Europe for 30 or 40 years. Don't tell me that this just got mothballed and they stopped operating these types of cells when they did it throughout the Cold War. A couple minutes left. Your final thoughts on this, Arnaud?
No, you're right. It's a cut and paste. The same way they've used Takfirist jihadists in the Middle East, that they nurtured in U.S. bases in the wake of the Iraq invasion. They then nurtured neo-Nazi groups, so it's the same situation. You just basically create those stay-behind cells. You have weapons caches, And when required, to the extent there might be someone about to be elected in any given country that you have an interest into maintaining control over, boom, you unleash those groups. You create a strategy of tension, and basically you prevent any kind of reasonable approach to problems in general from taking place. This is very old, ancient. But I want to go back to what you were saying with the Khorasan group. Khorasan in Islamic eschatology, the black banners, right? Everybody talks about this. It's really at the core of the eschatological aspect of the Quran. And the black banners are supposed to be this army that will indeed come from Afghanistan and basically unfurl throughout, the land of Islam, and no one will be able to resist them. So there's this element, also this almost cartoonish elements designed to strike terror within the heart of, regular believers, as to any kind of connection with sacred scripture, so that you could somehow defeat them before they even get the chance to develop defense antibodies. So all those things have been worked out, thought over, and studied in Western intelligence labs before being deployed. So it's par for the course.
And I point people to the work of F. William Engdahl on the U.S. and CIA clandestine terror in the Caucasus and so forth. And he points to, operatives like Graham Fuller from the CIA, the Gulen network. All of this is basically cut and paste operations, exactly as you said, Arnaud Develay. Arnaud Develay, author of Foreign Entanglements. Thank you for joining us on TNT this week.
Thank you, Patrick. Always a pleasure.
There he goes, ladies and gentlemen. That's Arnaud Develay, live and direct from Moscow. Listen, top of the hour news headlines coming up. When we come back, we'll continue delving into this with great military analyst, former CIA operative Larry Johnson. We'll discuss the Crimea attacks and much, much more on the other side. Stay with us here at TNT.